Not so long ago, I watched a video called The Greatest Fighting Game Mechanic by a YouTuber called Theory Fighter. It's a pretty good video, I suggest you check it out, and while it wasn't the only one that inspired me to touch on this subject, it was certainly one that further motivated me to bring up the topic of combo breakers in fighting games. Although I want to be more specific and address arena fighters, namely Kill la Kill If, Jump Force, and Storm 4. Reason being that these three games have combo breaking mechanics, but the way they function individually is very different and have varying results. I want to start off with Kill la Kill If because I think out of the three, this is the one that's the closest to recapturing many of the combo breakers present in competitive fighting games, and this is largely due to its cost. I think the best game to use to draw some comparisons with is BlazBlue Cross Tag Battle. In that game, you can either push your opponent away while you're blocking, or escape from taking hits by just simply activating the cross burst. And I think what especially makes this the best example to compare with Kill la Kill If is that when you look at Guilty Gear and Dragon Ball FighterZ, those games have their own individual meters dedicated for combo breakers, and in the case of FighterZ, it doesn't even work when you're taking hits. But with BlazBlue Cross Tag and Kill la Kill If, the cost to using combo breakers is draining the gauge of something else crucial in the offensive department. With Kill la Kill If, it costs 2 of the meter bars, which is the exact amount necessary to performing a special attack, while in BlazBlue, it takes away all of your cross gauge. The purpose of setting it up like this is to give a significant enough punishment to the player for essentially chickening out from taking damage that was upon him, and as a consequence for letting their guard down. It resets everyone's positions, but it also puts you at a disadvantage on one department, and given these limitations also makes it so you won't abuse this mechanic, and instead more consideration has to be put into its usage. But when you look at Jump Force, it's a bit of a different story. It has a similar philosophy as BlazBlue Cross Tag Battle and Kill la Kill If, in the sense that the escape mechanic shares the same meter as several other attack or defense features. In this case, it would be dashes and several other forms of counters. The problem with Jump Force, though, is that the mobility gauge is poorly defined. Now, with BlazBlue and Kill la Kill If, you can tell exactly how much it costs to use the combo breaker, while with Jump Force, it is actually made clear that it takes away all of your mobility gauge when you use the escape mechanic, but unfortunately there are other ways of breaking a combo, namely dodges and high speed counters. Both of them not made 100% clear exactly how much they cost, and you want to know why? It's because the meter is just a blue circle without any bars telling you exactly the amount necessary to pull off an evasive stunt. And even when you do get an idea of how much they cost, you realize that it's not that much, which defeats one of the most important rules of Combo Breaker, which is putting the user at a big enough disadvantage. This might not really apply to instant transmission dodges because you don't even take damage in the first place, so it's nothing more than a matter of timing. Counters, on the other hand, rely on you hitting square at exactly the right time before your opponent gives an opening or consecutive hit. Now, in cases like these, you either study the full frame data of the game and know exactly when to counter against every character, or you constantly spam square until something happens. You can imagine what option most people will probably go with. While I do understand the philosophy of high speed counters, as they're meant to reward players who time their button game better than someone who will just take the easy route and use the escape mechanic, hence why the cost is much lower. But at the end of the day, it only really rewards reckless gameplay. This is not the first time Spike Chunsoft used timing as a requisite for breaking a combo. Burning Blood worked very similar, in which you were able to sidestep your way out of a combo with the right timing. Personally, I think this type of thing should just disappear entirely. All it really does is allow players to cheaply get out of a combo after they let their guard down. It also doesn't help that the mobility gauge is not even that fatal to lose. Even in the off chance you deplete all of it, all that really means is that you can't dash and use the different forms of countering for a brief period, which even then will most likely happen if you only use the escape mechanic instead of other means. In the meantime, all you have to do is wait until the meter starts charging, which isn't that infrequent, and even though they do have their fair share of costs, the actual requirement is a lot lower. You could literally escape from a combo with piss poor stamina. So what ends up happening is this game becomes a huge gamble. You'll see people abuse these evasive mechanics and not really using it in a calculative manner. Just look at a game like Dengeki Bunko fighting CLIMAX Ignition. Its equivalent to an escape is the blast feature, which works similarly to burst from Guilty Gear, where you can only use it once it's charged up to 100%, allowing you to break combos. But then there's also the fact that blast has the additional effect of replenishing your climax gauge, and if you instead use it to break combos, it won't have that effect, essentially robbing you the chance of having your climax gauge rapidly filled up, at least until it charges up again. It's a genius way of balancing the attack and defense opportunities that you'll either gain or miss depending on which choice you make at the moment. However, Jump Force, since it's not a smart game, as a result, the mobility gauge is just a complete mess. Now, there's probably more I could say about Jump Force, but I'll keep my thoughts on the game to myself for now. Instead, let's bring up a familiar face, the Ultimate Ninja Storm series. Now, I'll exclusively talk about Storm 4 because when it comes to Ultimate Ninja games, its version of a combo breaker is definitely the substitution jutsu, which has evolved over the years and its results vary depending on the title. Storm 4 is the most recent one, so I think it's fair to talk about that. Now, Storm 4's combo breaker is also not very punishing to use, at least not on a surface level. You have 4 substitutions available at once, no majorly crucial cost to using it. You can perform other offensive and defensive features about as well since the sub bar is separate from everything else. The cooling period isn't super high, so it seems like this mechanic gives you a lot of leeway and in many ways sort of defy our standards for combo breakers that we've established in this video. Nevertheless, despite all of that, it actually works. It works very well, and I would even go so far as to say that it's probably the best mechanic in this game. Let me explain why. Now, I've made these points in the past, even if they were somewhat briefly explained and not as direct to the point, but I'm gonna be blunt in this video. Storm 4 is not an offensively deep game. You have Circle, and that's it. There aren't a ton of opportunities to create complicated combos. Not to say that you can't extend your combos, there are certainly ways of doing that. You can chakra dash and switch characters if you want a more basic way of extending combos. If you look at the competitive scene of Storm 4, you'll see people using tilts, debuff papers, double jumps, switch, and invisibility frames to extend combos in impressive ways. But even then, those methods usually involve a lot of simple loops. This is not like your typical competitive 2D fighter where the button layout allows for bigger and more creative opportunities. Storm 4 is generally pretty simple, and I think it's substitution jutsu that allows the game to bypass the simplicity, because by giving players more freedom to escape auto combos, it prevents us from playing a game of mashing. Suddenly movements become a lot more important, and one thing that really saves this game is that it's very fast. It is quick to respond to commands, which allows substitution to not only be countered, but also double countered. This is thanks to chakra dashes and the actual counter built into the game. As a result, a lot of the times you'll see this weird game of movements where people are jumping around and sidestepping, trying to position themselves defensively right, while also finding space to attack. And the thing about substitution is that even though you have 4 bars, eventually you'll realize that losing one of them is actually a big deal because it can allow you to predict your opponent's actions depending on who's at a disadvantage. And at some point, both of you engage in a brawl, you'll be the least likely to inflict more damage if you have less bars. And depending on how much chakra and support gauge your opponent has, this could really affect your decision to use a substitution or not. Not just because those help extend combos, but also because they're tools for countering substitution bars. Things like these are what end up elevating the thought process behind Storm 4 matches. Think of shooting games, for example. The main button you use to attack is R2. But it's when you take into account the aiming, the movements, the player's positions, the speed and limitation of the weapons, and many other factors, then suddenly this game that seems to have a simple button layout becomes a lot more of a complicated game once you step into the environment. Now, this isn't to say that I think Storm 4 is as competitive and mechanically deep as shooting games, because frankly they're not. Mostly because of the depth of the stages and number of players in the battlefield, but in terms of various factors giving depth to the simple controls in place, they work very similarly. Additionally, I did mention how the cooling period isn't super long, which is true, although it's worth noting that if you use a sub bar before it finishes replenishing, you're gonna have to wait for the next cooling stage, so that adds to the thought process behind your actions in the game. Now, out of these 3, if I had to pick my personal favorite, I would go with Kill la Kill If's combo breaker just because it's closer to resembling the kind of game design I seek from fighting games. But I do think it's interesting to explore how today's arena fighters are choosing to design their games, and hopefully this genre can evolve with time. I guess that's all I have to say. Might as well promote my other videos. I've talked about Kill la Kill If and Storm 4 in the past, you should check those out. In the future, I might revisit Crossing Voids, sort of like a 1 year later type video, so make sure to wait until that video comes out. Anyway, goodbye.